Hello and welcome to another installment of the Philosophy 101 series, a series of videos that I'm putting together to provide you with an introduction to philosophy, not just the ideas of philosophy, but the tools of philosophy so that you can actively engage in the act of philosophy. For the last few videos, we've been thinking about the philosophy of religion, and in the last video, we examined miracles and their we attempted to define them. We looked at arguments for and against them, and we looked at some of the arguments for the existence of God using miracles as evidence and so on, and all of that good stuff. So now we are going to move on. We're going to start thinking about religion and science and the complex relationship that exists between them. So imagine for a moment standing in a grand cathedral with sunlight streaming through stained glass windows and feeling a profound sense of connection to something greater. Now picture standing under a vast night sky, stars scattered like diamonds, contemplating your place in the cosmos. Both experiences inspire awe, but one comes through religion and the other through science. Religion and science are two powerful forces that shape how we think, live, and progress as a species. They're often portrayed as adversaries in a cosmic tug of war, but is this portrayal accurate? Are they truly at odds, or can they coexist, perhaps even complement each other? These are the questions that we're going to attempt to tackle today. So we'll start by comparing their methods, how religion and science approach understanding. Then we're going to explore some key moments in history where they clashed or cooperated, and from there we'll dive into philosophical perspectives on their relationships, including whether they are fundamentally incompatible or whether they can inform each other. And finally, we'll look at some of the modern debates, such as evolution and artificial intelligence and ethics and so on, to see how this ancient dialogue continues to shape our world today. So by the end of this video, I hope that you'll see that this isn't just like an academic exercise. The relationship between science and religion influences education and policy, and even how we respond to global challenges like climate change and medical ethics and so on. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Religion and science, a cosmic game of tug of war. Very dramatic, but I liked it. So we're going to start by comparing the methods of religion and science. So we will look first at religion. We'll look at its methods and its objectives. So when we think of religion, we often think of the big questions. Why are we here? What's the purpose of life? What happens after we die? These are not simple questions with clear empirical answers. Instead, they delve into the realm of meaning and morality, concepts that shape our individual and collective lives. Religion approaches these questions with methods that are quite different from science. It relies on faith, believing in things that may not be directly observable or provable. Revelation plays a key role too. For example, the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, these texts are seen as sacred sources of knowledge offering divine insight into the human condition. Religion also draws deeply on spiritual practices like prayer and meditation and rituals to create experiences that transcend the mundane and connect individuals to something greater than themselves. These methods are subjective, personal, and communal, often tied to tradition and culture. But religion doesn't just seek knowledge, it offers purpose, moral frameworks, and a sense of belonging. So let's consider an example, the concept of forgiveness. Religions often provide narratives and practices to guide forgiveness. While science might study the psychological effects of forgiveness, religion frames it as a moral and spiritual duty, emphasizing its importance for community harmony and personal growth. So as you can see next to me on the slide, the main focus of religion is things like meaning and purpose and morality. And the methods that religion deploys in order to achieve that end are faith and revelation, sacred texts, rituals, and spiritual practices. And examples of this sort of in action are ethical teachings like the Ten Commandments or the Noble Eightfold Path. Or we see it in practices like prayer and fasting and pilgrimage. So that is religion's sort of methods and objectives in a very brief nutshell. So let's shift gears and look at science. Where religion might ask, why are we here? Science asks, how did we get here? Science is grounded in observation and evidence. It's a methodical, step-by-step process aimed at understanding the natural world through experimentation and reasoning. Science begins with curiosity, a question about how something works. From there, hypotheses are formed and tested through experiments. Crucially, these experiments are repeatable, meaning that anyone with the right tools and methods should arrive at the same result. This approach has given us everything from the laws of motion to the very technology that you are using to watch this video. For instance, think about the discovery of penicillin. Alexander Fleming didn't stumble upon it because of divine revelation, but because of careful observation. He noticed that mold killed bacteria in a petri dish, leading to the development of antibiotics, which revolutionized medicine in a way that just cannot be overstated and has saved hundreds of millions of lives. So as you can see from the slide, the main focus of religion, of science rather, is really it's about understanding the natural world. And the methods that we deploy in order to do that are empirical observation, experimentation, and logical reasoning, which has given us things like the theory of gravity, or the discovery of DNA, and so on. So, do you think that religion and science address fundamentally different questions, or do their inquiries overlap? And why do you think that? So, you might think about how religion might address ultimate questions of purpose, like why do we exist? Well, science explains mechanisms. How did life evolve? And you might think about things like where overlap occurs, like the origins of the universe, which both religious creation stories and scientific theories like the Big Bang come into play. So I want you to attempt to answer that question. So jump in the comments to do that. Obviously pause the video because we've got a fair bit more to get through. So upon your return, we'll do another activity that will help to sort of cement what we've done so far, hopefully. So now that you're back, I have another activity for you. And it's a really simple one. So what I want you to do is write down one question that science is better equipped to answer. So that can be questions like what causes diseases, how can they be cured, things of that nature, right? And I also want you to write down one question that might be more suited to religion. So that's things like, what is the moral significance of suffering, and so on and so forth. So have a go at that. This is a really nice and easy one, I thought. So have a go at that, and upon your return, we will move on. So now we can start to think about some historical examples of conflict and cooperation between science and religion. So we're going to start with conflict. So we're going to do a bit of time traveling. So let me take you back to the 17th century, specifically to Italy, at a time when the Catholic Church wielded immense influence over intellectual life. Enter Galileo Galilei, a brilliant scientist armed with a telescope and a controversial idea that the Earth was not the centre of the universe. This idea, heliocentrism, it wasn't a new idea. It wasn't even Galileo's idea. It actually originated with Copernicus, but it was Galileo's observations that provided compelling evidence. Imagine Galileo's excitement as he pointed his telescope towards the sky and saw moons orbiting Jupiter. Proof that not everything revolved around the Earth. But this excitement clashed with the Church's interpretation of Scripture, which suggested a geocentric universe. Galileo's findings threatened not just theology, but the Church's authority over the people. In 1633, Galileo stood trial before the Inquisition. He was forced to recant his views, and he spent the rest of his life under house arrest. While this is often seen as a clear case of religion opposing science, it's actually more complex than that. Because the Church wasn't actually they were defending Scripture, but that was the least of their concerns. That was the front, as it were. But there was a lot of it from the Church's side of things was them defending their institutional authority at a time of great upheaval. So as you can see from on the slide, that side, there are a couple of key issues in Galileo's case. So we have a clash between Scripture and empirical evidence. So the Church's literal interpretation of Scripture conflicted with Galileo's observations. We also have the clash between authority and discovery. Galileo's findings challenged the Church's control over knowledge. They essentially were, in some sense, in control of truth, or what was considered true. And Galileo's findings really messed with that because, it directly contradicted the Scripture and so on. And the Church's authority is obviously built on top of those, on top of that Scripture. So do you think this conflict was primarily about theology, or do you think it involved broader issues that we've mentioned, the issues of authority and power? So I want you to have a go at answering this in the comments. So you might argue that the Church feared losing control over knowledge, especially during the Reformation. As I sort of alluded to, the Church, in some sense, because of their authority, were able to dictate what is true. And this new information from that came as a result of Galileo's observation meant the Church potentially was saying something that wasn't true, and that was a problem for them. But you might also highlight Galileo's faith, because he was obviously a religious man himself, showing and this in some sense shows that the conflict was never really between like belief in God and science, but instead was a conflict between interpretations of truth. So attempt to answer that in the comments. Obviously pause the video to do that, and I will see you upon your return. So now we have, now that we've looked at a famous conflict between religion and science, if not the most famous conflict between religion and science, we can now start to think about some moments of cooperation between religion and science. So we're going to fast forward to the 20th century, and in that time we find an example of harmony between religion and science. So George Lemaître, a Catholic priest and physicist, proposed what we now call the Big Bang Theory, a scientific explanation for the universe's origins. Now, Lemaître never called it the Big Bang. That was a later thing, but nonetheless. So Lemaître was a man of both faith and science, embodying the idea that these two domains can coexist. His theory suggested that the universe had a beginning. And that's important, right? Because it could be eternal. We potentially don't really know. So this idea was that the universe had a beginning, and that actually does faintly echo the concept of creation found in many religious traditions, because they all talk about a beginning. And I will say that's a loose association, but nonetheless, it's in there, right? But obviously, Lemaître was a scientist, so he didn't approach it using the scripture and stuff. He obviously used mathematics and observational data instead to make his case. Interestingly, the Pope at the time initially saw the Big Bang as proof of divine creation. But Lemaître himself advised caution, emphasizing the scientific independence of his work. And this, I think, underscores the potential for dialogue between these two realms. So there are some key points, as you can see on the slide, in Lemaître's case. So one is that the Big Bang Theory complements some religious ideas of creation very, very loosely. And the other is that religious scientists like Lemaître bridge faith and reason. So what I want you to do now is I want you to write down an example of another scientific theory that you believe aligns with religious belief. Now, there is an enormous rabbit hole associated with this, so for the sake of the exercise, confine it to scientific theory as you understand it. Otherwise, you'll be here forever researching and so on. So you might think of things like the fine-tuning of the universal constants, things like the strength, gravity, and so on, which some might interpret as evidence of a creator. Or you could think about quantum mechanics, which for some resonates with the sort of mystical religious ideas around the sort of interconnectedness of all things. So those are some potential things, right? So write down an example of another scientific theory that you believe aligns with religious beliefs. So jump in the comments with that. And when you return, we're going to move on and think about the philosophical perspectives on religion and science. So let's now dive into a perspective that has fueled much of public imagination. The idea that religion and science are locked into some sort of eternal struggle. And this idea is known as the Conflict Thesis, which was popularized by figures like John William Draper and Andrew Dickson White in the 19th century. It argues that science and religion are fundamentally incompatible. According to this view, science thrives on questioning, experimentation, and progress, while religion is seen as dogmatic, resisting change, and clinging to outdated ideas. Think about historical moments like the Galileo affair or the debates over evolution. These episodes are often held up as proof that religion stifles scientific discovery. But does the conflict thesis tell the whole story? For example, many early scientists, including Isaac Newton, who might be the smartest human being that ever lived, were deeply religious, and they saw their work as uncovering the divine order of creation. Moreover, institutions like monasteries played a crucial role in preserving and advancing knowledge during the Middle Ages. So the conflict thesis, while influential, it risks oversimplifying a much more nuanced relationship. So it's important to ask whether apparent conflicts were really about religion and science, or whether they were driven by other factors like politics or power or cultural shifts. So if conflict thesis could be boiled down into two sentences, it's the key ideas presented to you on the slide. So that is that religion hinders scientific process, and science undermines traditional religious beliefs. So do you think the conflict thesis oversimplifies the relationship between religion and science? Why and why not? So I want you to answer this. So pause the video and jump in the comments to answer this. So there are some things you might consider, right? So you might argue that the conflict thesis, you might argue that you agree with the conflict thesis, citing ongoing debates between creationism and evolution in school. Or you might challenge the conflict thesis, pointing out that many scientific pioneers were religious, or that modern examples, things like religious organizations funding medical research and so on, you might argue that these things contradict this view presented by conflict thesis. So pause the video, jump in the comments with your response to that. And when you return, we will move on. Now let's consider a very different perspective. The independence thesis, proposed by Stephen Jay Gould through his concept of non-overlapping magisteria, or NOMA. And this view suggests that religion and science operate in separate domains. Science explains the natural world, how things work. Religion, on the other hand, deals with the questions of meaning and morality and purpose. Gould argued that since these domains don't overlap, there's no inherent conflict between them. For example, science might explain the biomechanical processes behind life, while religion provides a framework for understanding its spiritual significance. So let's think about how this plays out in real-world scenarios. Imagine a scientist who's also a devout Christian. He or she might view their scientific work as uncovering the mechanisms of God's creation while turning to their faith for moral guidance. In this way, the two domains complement each other rather than contradict each other. However, the independence thesis has its critics. Some argue that science and religion do overlap, particularly in areas like the origin of the universe or the ethical implications of technology. Others feel that by separating the two, we risk ignoring their potential to enrich one another. So the key ideas with independence thesis really are pretty simple. That science explains the natural world, and that religion addresses moral and sort of spiritual questions. So, as you can see, there's another question on the screen for you to answer. So, do you agree that science and religion operate in distinct domains, or do they overlap, and why? So I'll answer this, obviously pause the video, jump in the comments and answer this. Some things you might consider, let's see. So you might highlight overlaps in debates on cloning or AI or cosmology, where science and religion both weigh in. Or you might argue that separating them prevents unnecessary conflict and allows each to focus on its strengths. So those are some things to consider while you answer that question. So do you agree that science and religion operate in distinct domains, or do they overlap, and why? So pause the video, answer that question, and we shall move on to another idea. So finally we come to the integration thesis, which takes an optimistic view of the relationship between religion and science. This perspective suggests that the two can not only coexist, but actually inform and enrich one another. For example, consider environmental stewardship. Many religious traditions emphasize caring for creation, and science provides the data and tools to address issues like climate change. Together, they could create a powerful framework for action. The integration thesis also applies to bioethics. Advances in genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and end-of-life care raise profound ethical questions. Religious traditions offer centuries of moral reasoning that can guide these debates, ensuring that scientific progress respects human dignity and values. But integration isn't just about religion guiding science, it goes both ways. Scientific discoveries can inspire spiritual awe. Think about the Hubble Space Telescope's images of distant galaxies, or the James Webb Telescope, or whatever. For many, these glimpses of the cosmos evoke a sense of wonder that complements rather than contradicts their faith. So there's only one really sort of important sort of key idea, as it were, for integration theory, and that is that the mutual enrichment between religion and science. And as I said, some examples of this would be things like environmental stewardship, and bioethics, and cosmology. So think about an example of how religion and science could work together to solve a global challenge. I want you to jump in the comments with your sort of response. So what is something that science and religion could work together on in order to solve a challenge? So you might think about things like combating climate change by combining religious calls for stewardship with scientific innovation. Or you might think about things like developing ethical guidelines for AI based on religious principles and scientific understanding and things like that. So I want you to have a good think about that. Obviously, pause the video. Have a good think about that and jump in the comments with your response. So let's move on. Now we can start to think about some of the contemporary debates and really like pathways forward. So today, the relationship between religion and science plays out in several high-stakes debates. One major area is evolution. While evolution is a cornerstone of modern biology, and has an just enormous amount of supporting evidence. Some religious groups view it as incompatible with their beliefs about creation. And this, in turn, has led to really quite heated disputes over schools, a school curriculum, especially in the United States. Another pressing issue is medical ethics. So, advances in biotechnology like stem cell research and genetic editing offer incredible potential, but also raise difficult questions. For example, if we can design perfect babies, should we? Religious perspectives often emphasize the sanctity of life and the dangers of playing God, offering important counterpoints to unchecked scientific ambition. Artificial intelligence is yet another frontier. As AI advances, it challenges our understanding of consciousness, free will, and even what it means to be human. Can science alone answer these questions, or do we also need insights from philosophy and religion? So there are, as you can see on the slide, there are obviously some examples of contemporary debates that we've actually mentioned thus far. So you've got evolution and creationism, ethics in biotechnology, things like genetic editing and so on. And you've got the implications of artificial intelligence. So a final question that I want you to answer in the comments is, can religion and science collaborate to address these challenges, or are the differences just too great? So I need to really think deeply about this. So you might say yes, collaboration could balance scientific innovation with ethical safeguards, with things like religious groups supporting sustainable technologies and so on. Or you might say no, fundamental disagreements on issues like evolution might limit any sort of meaningful dialogue. But I want you to pause the video and answer that question for yourself. It's no good just parroting what I've said. You've got to think about this yourself. So pause the video and do that. So the future of the relationship between science and religion, it really does depend on dialogue. By recognizing their unique strengths and limitations, we can use elements of both to address humanity's most pressing challenges. Imagine a world where science provides solutions to problems like climate change, and religion and its associated philosophies motivate and inspire people to act with compassion and justice. As we look ahead, it's worth remembering that this isn't just an abstract debate. It's about how we, as a global community, navigate questions of meaning and progress and responsibility in a rapidly changing world. In conclusion, science and religion represent two profound ways of understanding the world. Science excels at explaining the mechanisms of the universe, while religion delves into questions of morality and meaning. While their methods and goals differ, their interplay, whether intention or harmony, continues to shape human thought progress. So let me leave you with this question. Do you believe science and religion are ultimately compatible? Why or why not? So take a few minutes to reflect on this and write down your thoughts. I'd appreciate if you could put it in the comments. That'd be wonderful. It really would be fantastic to read. So thank you for allowing me to to share this with you today, and thank you for your time and attention. Um, it's been great to share. In the next video, we're gonna shift gears and we're gonna start to think about political philosophy, exploring concepts like justice, authority, and human rights. So I look forward to seeing you there. So thank you very much for your engagement today. And before I go, I would like to ask if you could do the YouTube things, like the video, subscribe to the channel and all that good stuff. It not only tells YouTube you want to see more of me, it also lets YouTube know that you're interested in what we're talking about. You're interested in philosophy and theology and so on. So that YouTube will then start showing you obviously more of my content, but other people talking about these things as well, which in turn will help to broaden your perspective, and also will mean that you're not getting too pinned down in any sort of one interpretation of things. So thank you very much for your time today. I very much look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you and goodbye.